Judges Corner is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com and GatheringMagic.com. Support our show by visiting both websites. Now it's time for Judges Corner with David Green.
Welcome back to Judges Corner. This week we're going to take a look at some more Dragon's Maze cards. If you didn't see the episode last week, go ahead and click the link here where we covered some interesting rules, interactions, and weird cards in Dragon's Maze. So this week we're going to do the same thing with a couple new cards. The first card we're going to take a look at is Melek. So our first card is Melek, the Izzet Maze Runner. Melek has a cool ability that reveals the top card of your library, and as long as it's revealed, if it's an instant or sorcery, you can cast it from your library. And when you do, you get to copy the instant or sorcery that you cast from your library. So some important things to know about Melek are the cards that are on top of your library are revealed, but they're not actually in your hand. They're still in the library zone. So like if you had to discard cards from your hand, you can't discard cards off the top of your library. The next thing would be that if you go to draw cards while Melek is in play, each individual card is drawn individually, so every single card you draw is going to get seen by the opponent when you go to draw them. Also, when you go to cast an instant or sorcery off the top of your library, you can pay any additional costs or alternative costs, but the copy is going to be a copy of whatever you casted. So if you pay a cost like Overload, you're going to get the Overload as the copy as well. But you can't overload a copy and just cast the regular one as is. Also, the copy will have any modes that you selected for the original card, and any values of X are going to be whatever you paid into the original spell. Now, if you go to target something, you can choose different targets because Melek allows that. Also, when you cast the copy, things like Flux Charger or Extort won't trigger, and that's because you didn't actually cast the copy, you just put it onto the stack. Although they will trigger for the original spell you cast. And it's important to note that you can't fuse split cards when you cast them from your library, but that's because you can't fuse split cards unless they're cast from your hand. Our next card is Notion Thief, a 4 mana cost creature that has flash, and it has the replacement effect of if an opponent would draw a card, except for the first one he or she would draw in their draw step, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card instead. So it basically steals all the cards that your opponent would draw, except for the one they would draw first for their turn. For example, if I play Sphinx's Revelation and you flash in Notion Thief, you're going to steal all of the cards I would get off of Sphinx's Revelation, but I'm still going to gain the life off of Sphinx. So it's pretty straightforward, but a couple of the examples we want to talk about are, what if I have a Notion Thief and you have a Notion Thief? Same scenario, 2 Notion Thieves, but I play a Sphinx's Revelation for X equals 3. Your Notion Thief is going to try to steal my cards from Sphinx's Revelation, and then my Notion Thief is going to replace your Notion Thief's effect, and I'm going to get those cards back. So effectively, 2 Notion Thieves will cancel each other out. The next example we have is Notion Thief, and you have a Blood Scrivener. When you go to draw, and you have no cards in hand, Blood Scrivener is going to draw 2 cards and lose 1 life. The first card will be fine, because that's the first card perhaps that you're drawing for your turn, but the second card is what my Notion Thief is going to try to steal from you, and it'll end up taking that card and you'll lose 1 life. Now, of course, if there's 2 Notion Thieves on the battlefield, they'll both cancel each other out. It's also worth noting that if I were to draw a card during my upkeep, maybe through Phyrexian Arena, Notion Thief can steal that card because it's not the first card I'm drawing for my draw step. Next, we have Render Silent, which is basically a counterspell and a silence all walled up in one. So some things to note with that card are, it doesn't stop your opponent from casting anything in response to Render Silent, and it won't stop any spells already cast, well, except for the one it's trying to counter. Render Silent will do nothing if its target becomes illegal, maybe because it gets countered by game rules or removed from the stack, so it won't actually counter the spell, and then the rest of its effect will be countered by game rules because it has an illegal target. Render Silent can target cards that can't be countered, like Abrupt Decay, it just won't counter the card, but it will silence for the rest of the turn. So Trait Doctoring is a bit of a fun card, not because it's going to see a lot of standard play, but because it'll be a card used again and again in rules questions between judges. Trait Doctoring says, change the text of target permanent by replacing all instances of one color word with another, or one basic land type with another until end of turn. And it also has Cipher. We're not really going to talk about Cipher, you can learn more about that in our Gatecrash episode, because we're really going to focus on the text and type changing effects of Trait Doctoring. So, some things to note. First off, you don't actually pick what you're changing until resolution. Second, you can target stuff that doesn't have a word or a basic land type, but it won't really do anything to the spell. Next, you can change things like non-black or mountain walk, even though it doesn't directly say mountain or black. And when you do, you can change it from non-black to non-blue, or mountain walk to forest walk, or things like that. And finally, let's say we have a Steam Vents in play and we play Trait Doctoring on it, changing island to forest. This will basically make it tap as if it were a stomping ground, tapping for red and green instead of blue or green, but it'll still be named Steam Vents. So that concludes our episode on Dragon's Maze and some of the weirder interactions we wanted to cover in this episode. If you have any questions about this episode, previous episodes, or any rules questions in general, send them to us at judgescorner@gatheringmagic.com or leave a comment below. And remember, Notion Thief isn't the only card that stops Sphinx's revelation. Possibility Storm does too. Wait. And don't forget to have fun. So this concludes our episode covering cards in Dragon's Maze. So this concludes our episode covering cards that we wanted to review in this episode of Dragon's